The tractor's front wheel dropped 6 feet through solid earth before Marcus Henley even had time to yank the clutch. 1 second he was plowing the north field like he'd done every spring for 43 years, and the next, the ground simply opened up and swallowed half his machine like the land had been waiting all this time to take something back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus killed the engine and sat there in the sudden silence, his hands still gripping the wheel, his heart hammering against his ribs. Dust hung in the air around him. The tractor tilted forward at a steep angle, its nose pointing down into darkness. Behind him, the field stretched out in neat brown furrows, ordinary and unchanged. Ahead, the earth had opened up like a mouth. He was 71 years old, too old for this kind of surprise, too old for a lot of things, if he was being honest. His joints ached in the mornings now, his back complained after a full day's work, and his daughter Claire had been after him for months to sell the farm and move into town. She'd even found him a nice little house near the library, sent him pictures on his phone that he'd looked at once and then deleted. But this land had been in the Henley family for 5 generations. His great-great-grandfather had broken the first ground here in 1872, had built the original farmhouse with his own hands, had buried 3 children in the small cemetery plot on the eastern ridge. Marcus's grandfather had survived the Dust Bowl by sheer stubbornness, refusing to abandon the farm when half the county gave up and moved west. His father had modernized, brought in irrigation, turned the struggling operation into something that could support a family with dignity. And Marcus had held on. Through bad years and good, through his wife Sarah's long illness and death, through his son's decision to become a lawyer instead of a farmer, through drought and flood and the steady creep of suburban development that had swallowed every farm around him until his land stood alone, a 400-acre island of crops surrounded by housing developments and strip malls. He climbed down from the tractor carefully, testing each step. His boots hit solid ground and he moved around to look at what had happened. The hole was maybe 8 feet across, perfectly circular, as if someone had cut it with a giant cookie cutter. The tractor's front end hung suspended over empty space, held up only by the rear wheels still on solid ground. Marcus knelt at the edge and peered down. The hole dropped straight down for about 10 feet, then opened into something larger, a cavern maybe, or a tunnel. He could see rough stone walls, the glint of standing water at the bottom, and something else. Something that didn't belong. Wooden beams, old and rotted, but still visible. Brickwork. This wasn't a natural sinkhole. This was man-made. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Claire, probably. She called every day around this time, checking on him like he was a child who couldn't be trusted alone. He ignored it and kept staring into the hole. His land. His family's land for almost 150 years. And there was something built underneath it that he'd never known about. A memory surfaced, sudden and sharp. He was maybe 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table while his grandfather and father argued in low, tense voices. His mother had sent him to his room, but he'd crept back and listened from the hallway. His grandfather had been saying something about the old days, about things buried that should stay buried, about promises made that bound a family even beyond death. His father had told the old man to stop filling Marcus's head with ghost stories, but his grandfather had gripped his father's arm and said something Marcus had never forgotten, even though he hadn't understood it at the time. The land remembers, Thomas. Whether we do or not, the land remembers. Marcus pulled out his phone and called the one person he trusted to keep her mouth shut. His neighbor, Ruth Calloway, picked up on the second ring. Marcus, everything okay? Need your help. Something happened in the north field. 20 minutes later, Ruth pulled up in her dusty pickup truck. She was 68, had run her own farm since her husband died 15 years ago, and had the kind of practical sense that came from a lifetime of solving problems without asking for permission. She took one look at the hole and let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. How deep does it go? Don't know yet, but Ruth, look at those beams, that brickwork. Somebody built something down there. She knelt beside him, squinting into the darkness. Your grandfather ever mention anything about this? He talked about a lot of things. Most of it sounded like old man rambling. Marcus paused. But he used to say the land had secrets. Said every farm did. if it was old enough. Ruth pulled a flashlight from her truck and shined it down into the hole. The beam caught on something metallic, a reflection that didn't look like standing water. "You planning to go down there?" "Have to. Can't just leave a hole in the middle of my field." "Could call the county. Let them deal with it." Marcus shook his head. "And have them crawling all over my land? Asking questions? No, whatever's down there, I'll handle it myself." Ruth studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll get some rope from my truck. You're not going down there without a safety line, not at your age." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They rigged a climbing harness from Ruth's emergency kit and secured the rope to the tractor's rear axle. Marcus tested it twice before he was satisfied, then lowered himself over the edge. The descent was easier than he'd expected. The walls of the shaft were rough stone, probably limestone, with enough handholds that he barely needed the rope. His boots hit the bottom with a splash. The water was only a few inches deep, cold and stagnant. The air smelled of earth and something else, something old and metallic. He pulled out his own flashlight and swept the beam around. He was standing in a chamber, maybe 20 feet across. The ceiling was supported by thick wooden beams that had somehow survived decades underground. The walls were lined with brick, careful masonry work that spoke of skilled hands. But it was what filled the chamber that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Crates, dozens of them stacked along the walls, some collapsed with age, others still intact. He moved to the nearest one and pried at the rotted wood. It fell away easily, revealing glass bottles packed in straw. He lifted one out carefully, brushing away the grime. The bottle was heavy, sealed with wax, and when he held it up to his flashlight, he could see liquid inside, amber-colored and clear. On the side of the bottle, stamped into the glass, was a label. Henley Reserve, 1897. Marcus stared at it, his mind racing. Henley Reserve, his family name. 1897. That would have been his great-grandfather's time, the man who'd built the original farmhouse. But what was this? Wine, whiskey, and why hidden in a secret chamber under the north field? He moved deeper into the chamber, his light catching on more crates, more bottles. Some were broken, their contents long since evaporated, but many were intact, preserved by the cool darkness and the dry air above the waterline. He found barrels, too, oak ones with metal hoops sealed tight. One had split with age, and inside he could see the dried remains of what might have been grain. At the far end of the chamber, set into the brick wall, was an iron door. It was smaller than a regular door, maybe 4 feet high, secured with a heavy padlock that had rusted solid. Marcus studied it, then made his decision. Whatever was behind that door, he needed to know. "Marcus," Ruth's voice echoed down from above. "You alive down there?" "I'm good. Found something interesting." "Interesting how?" "The kind of interesting that needs more time." He paused, looking at the chamber again, at the careful construction, the hidden location. "Ruth, I need you to do me a favor. Don't tell anyone about this, not yet." There was a long pause. "Marcus Henley, what did you find?" "Something my family buried a long time ago, something that's going to change everything." He climbed back up, his mind churning with questions. Ruth helped him over the edge and they stood together, looking at the hole in the field, at the tractor still hanging precariously over the void. "So?" Ruth asked. "What's down there?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "Evidence that my great-grandfather had a side business, one the family never talked about." He pulled out the bottle he'd brought up with him, showed her the label. Ruth's eyes widened. "Henley Reserve? Marcus, this is from Prohibition times or close to it. You're telling me your family was running a bootlegging operation?" "That's what it looks like. And if there's one chamber, there might be more. Those tunnels have to lead somewhere." They both turned to look at the farmland stretching out around them. 400 acres that had been in his family for 5 generations. 400 acres that suddenly held secrets Marcus had never imagined. His grandfather's cryptic words came back to him. The land remembers. "What are you going to do?" Ruth asked quietly. Marcus looked at the bottle in his hands, then at the hole in the field, then at the farmhouse in the distance, the house his great-grandfather had built with his own hands. What was he going to do? He'd spent his whole life maintaining this land, preserving his family's legacy, never really understanding what that legacy was. And now, at 71, when his daughter was pressuring him to sell, when the developers were circling like vultures, when he was tired and sore and ready to finally rest, the land had decided to give up its secrets. "I'm going to find out the truth," he said finally, "about what my family was doing down there, about what else might be hidden on this land, about why nobody ever told me any of this." Ruth nodded slowly. "And if you don't like what you find?" It was a good question. Marcus thought about his grandfather, a stern man who'd survived the Depression and never wasted a word. He thought about his father, who'd worked this land until the day he died, who'd gone to his grave without ever mentioning the chamber beneath the north field. He thought about the generations of Henleys who'd kept this secret, whatever it was, buried in the dark. "Then at least I'll know why they kept it secret," Marcus said, "and I can decide for myself what to do about it." But even as he said it, even as Ruth nodded her agreement and they began the work of securing the tractor and cordoning off the hole, Marcus felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he felt truly awake. The exhaustion that had been weighing on him, the temptation to just give up and sell and move into that little house near the library, all of it had burned away in the face of this mystery. His family had hidden something down there, something important enough to build chambers and tunnels for, important enough to keep secret for generations. And now it was his turn to decide what happened next. His turn to be the guardian of whatever legacy his ancestors had left behind. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and red over the fields, Marcus stood at the edge of the hole and made himself a promise. Whatever he found down there, whatever secrets the land had kept all these years, he would see it, through to the end. This was his inheritance, not the land itself, but the mysteries it held, and he'd be damned if he walked away now. Marcus spent the next 3 days clearing the chamber. He told Claire he was doing field maintenance, which wasn't entirely a lie. Ruth helped when she could, and together they hauled up crate after crate, cataloging what they found. By the third evening, Marcus's barn looked like a forgotten speakeasy from the 1920s. Over 200 bottles of whiskey, all bearing the Henley Reserve label, all dated between 1896 and 1928. The last crates had been sealed just a year before the stock market crashed, a year before everything fell apart. But it was the iron door that haunted Marcus. He'd tried everything to open it, bolt cutters, a hacksaw, even heating the lock with a torch. Nothing worked. The metal had fused solid with rust and time. Finally, Ruth brought over a cutting torch from her farm, and together they spent a humid afternoon burning through the hinges instead of the lock. When the door finally fell inward with a groan that echoed through the chamber, Marcus stood at the threshold and felt his heart hammering. His flashlight beam cut through darkness that smelled of paper and decay. Inside was a room, smaller than the main chamber, maybe 10 feet by 10. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were ledgers, journals, and stacks of documents wrapped in oilcloth. Marcus lifted the first ledger carefully. The leather cover cracked as he opened it, and his great-grandfather's handwriting stared back at him. Neat, precise entries dating back to 1895. Names, dates, quantities, and prices. But it wasn't just whiskey. The operation had been much larger than that. His great-grandfather had been distributing across 3 counties, supplying hotels, saloons, and private buyers. The numbers were staggering. In good months, the Henley operation had moved over 500 gallons. But there was more. Deeper in the room, wrapped in canvas and protected from moisture, Marcus found photographs. His great-grandfather, stern-faced and imposing, standing with other men in suits. Some of the faces were familiar, names Marcus had heard his grandfather mention. The mayor of the nearest town, a state senator, a county sheriff, all of them partners in the operation, all of them invested in keeping the Henley family business running. And then he found the letter. It was sealed in an envelope marked, "To my sons, to be opened only in the event of my death or imprisonment." The paper inside was yellow with age, the ink faded but still legible. Marcus sat down right there on the damp floor of the chamber and read. His great-grandfather had written it in 1927, a year before he died. The letter explained everything. How he'd started the whiskey operation to save the farm during a series of bad harvests in the 1890s, how it had grown, far beyond what he'd intended, becoming the largest bootlegging ring in the region. How he'd made deals with powerful men, agreements that protected his family but also bound them. and how, at the end, he'd realized he'd built something that couldn't be easily dismantled, something that would haunt the family long after he was gone. The last paragraph made Marcus's blood run cold. I have hidden records of every transaction, every partner, every payoff in a place only a Henley would think to look. If our family is ever threatened, if the land is ever at risk, use this information to protect what we've built. But know this, the power to protect is also the power to destroy. Choose wisely which legacy you wish to preserve. Marcus sat in the darkness for a long time after reading those words. His great-grandfather hadn't just built a bootlegging operation. He'd built insurance, leverage, a weapon, names, dates, and evidence of corruption involving families that were still powerful in the county today. Some of their descendants sat on the town council, served as judges, ran the biggest businesses. This wasn't just family history. This was a loaded gun pointed at the heart of the community. When he finally climbed back up, the sun was setting. Ruth was waiting by her truck, and one look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "That bad?" she asked quietly. "Worse. My great-grandfather kept records, detailed ones, of everyone involved in his operation, including people whose families still run this county." Ruth let out a low breath. "And now you know where those records are." Marcus held up the letter. "Not just where they are, what they were meant for. Protection, blackmail, if it came to that." "You going to tell Claire?" It was the question Marcus had been avoiding. His daughter had been calling every day, and he'd been giving her vague answers about field work. But he couldn't keep this from her forever. This was her inheritance, too, her legacy, whether she wanted it or not. "I have to. She deserves to know what she's really trying to get me to sell." Ruth nodded. "You want me there when you tell her?" Marcus considered it, then shook his head. "This is family business. I need to handle it myself." But when Claire arrived the next evening, she didn't come alone. She brought her brother Nathan with her, Marcus's son who'd left the farm 20 years ago and never looked back. And they brought someone else, a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as David Garrett, a real estate developer. Marcus stood on the porch and watched the three of them get out of Claire's car, and he felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't a family visit. This was an intervention. "Dad," Claire said, climbing the porch steps. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes rumpled from the drive. "We need to talk. I see you brought reinforcements." Marcus kept his voice level, but his hands were clenched at his sides. Nathan had the grace to look uncomfortable. At 45, he still had traces of the boy who'd helped with harvests before deciding he wanted a life that didn't smell like manure and diesel. "Dad, just hear us out, okay?" David Garrett stepped forward, all practiced charm and white teeth. "Mr. Henley, I've made your daughter a very generous offer for this property. Generous enough that you'd be able to retire comfortably, travel, enjoy your golden years without worrying about crops or weather or any of this." He gestured at the farm around them as if it were a burden to be shed, not a legacy to be protected. "How much?" Marcus asked, though he already knew he wouldn't care about the answer. Garrett named a figure that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Enough to set up Marcus for life, enough to give Claire and Nathan inheritances that would change their futures, enough to erase 150 years of Henley history and replace it with suburban homes and strip malls. "Dad," Claire said, and her voice was pleading now, "this is the best offer you're going to get. The county's been after this land for years. If you don't sell to Mr. Garrett, they'll start eminent domain proceedings. You'll lose it anyway, for a fraction of what he's offering." Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her. When had she become so tired? When had the weight of worrying about him started to show in the lines around her eyes? He wanted to be angry with her, but all he felt was a deep, aching sadness. "Come inside," he said finally. "All of you. There's something you need to see." He led them to the barn, to the stacks of crates and bottles he and Ruth had hauled up from the chamber. He watched their faces as they took it in, the shock and confusion giving way to understanding. Then he told them everything, about the chamber beneath the north field, about the bootlegging operation, about the ledgers and photographs, and the letter from his great-grandfather. When he finished, The barn was silent except for the sound of rain starting to fall on the metal roof. It had been building all day, dark clouds rolling in from the west, and now it came down in sheets, drumming against the barn like judgment. Claire spoke first. "You're telling me our family was running an illegal whiskey operation during Prohibition?" "Before Prohibition, too, for over 30 years. Nathan let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. "Well, that explains why Grandfather never wanted to talk about the old days. Jesus, Dad, do you know what this means? If this gets out, if people find out the Henley family was built on bootlegging and corruption?" "I know exactly what it means," Marcus said quietly. "I also know what those ledgers contain. Names of people whose families still have power in this county, evidence of deals and payoffs that some folks would pay a lot of money to keep buried." David Garrett had gone very still, his salesman's smile long gone. "Mr. Henley, I think you need to be very careful about what you do with that information." "Is that a threat?" Marcus asked, his voice soft but dangerous. "It's advice. This county has a long memory. If you start digging up the past, you might not like what digs back." Marcus took a step toward the developer, and despite being 71 and half a head shorter, there was something in his bearing that made Garrett step back. "Get off my land." "Dad," Claire started, but Marcus cut her off. "I said get off my land. This man is not welcome here." Garrett looked at Claire, at Nathan, then back at Marcus. Whatever he saw in the old farmer's face convinced him not to argue. He left without another word, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles as he hurried to his car. After he was gone, Marcus turned to his children. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the farmyard into a sea of mud, but none of them moved toward the house. This conversation needed to happen here, in the barn, where evidence of their family's sins was stacked in neat rows. "I'm not selling," Marcus said. "Dad, be reasonable," Nathan said. "So what if our great-grandfather was a bootlegger? That was 100 years ago. Nobody cares about that now." "They'll care about those ledgers. They'll care about who was involved and what they did. And if I sell this land, if I let developers tear it up, those records are going to be found. And when they are, a lot of powerful people are going to have questions they don't want to answer." Claire sat down on a hay bale, her face in her hands. "So what are you saying? We just sit on this forever? Let this land drag us down because of something people did a century ago?" "I'm saying this land is our responsibility. Good and bad, it's ours. And we don't get to walk away from it just because the truth is inconvenient." "You sound just like Grandfather," Nathan said, and it wasn't a compliment. Maybe he had a point. Marcus moved to the barn door, looking out at the rain sweeping across his fields. "You know what I've been thinking about? Why they kept it secret. Not just the bootlegging, but all of it. The deals, the corruption, the leverage they had over half the county. They could have used that power. They could have made themselves rich, could have controlled everything. But they didn't. They just kept farming, kept their heads down, kept the secrets buried." "Because they were afraid," Claire said quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe because they understood something we've forgotten. That power without wisdom is just another kind of destruction. That some things are worth more than money." He turned back to his children. "Your mother understood that. Near the end, when she was sick, she made me promise I'd never sell this land. Said it was more than just dirt and crops. Said it was a trust passed down from one generation to the next." "Mom was dying," Claire said, her voice breaking. "She wasn't thinking clearly. She was thinking more clearly than any of us." Marcus felt the weight of every year, every season, every harvest settle on his shoulders. "I made her a promise, Claire, and I'm not going to break it, not even for you." The silence that followed was broken only by the rain. Claire stood up slowly, her face wet with tears that had nothing to do with the weather. "Then I guess there's nothing left to say." "Claire," Nathan started, but she shook her head. "No, he's made his choice. He's choosing this land over his own children, just like he always has." She walked to the barn door, paused there with her back to Marcus. "When you're ready to stop being selfish, when you're ready to think about someone other than yourself and some dead people's secrets, call me. Until then, I'm done." She walked out into the rain, and after a moment, Nathan followed. Marcus watched their taillights disappear down the long driveway, watched the rain wash away their tire tracks, and felt something break inside his chest that he knew would never heal quite right. Ruth found him an hour later, still standing in the barn door, watching the storm. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him, and that was enough. "She'll come around," Ruth said finally. "Maybe, maybe not." Marcus's voice was rough. "Her mother died in that house, Ruth. She watched her waste away, watched me try to keep farming like I could plow through grief the way I plow through fields. I failed her then, and I'm failing her now. You're doing what you think is right. That doesn't make it hurt less." They stood together as the rain slowed, then stopped. The clouds broke apart, revealing stars that seemed too bright, too pure for a world that held this much pain. Marcus thought about his great-grandfather, about the letter he'd written, about the burden he'd passed down through generations. The power to protect is also the power to destroy. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Marcus asked, not expecting an answer. "I've got evidence that could ruin lives, could tear this community apart. I've got a daughter who hates me for not selling. I've got a farm that's worth millions to developers and nothing to anyone else. And I've got a promise to a dead woman that I hold my ground no matter what." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandfather told me something once, years ago when my husband died and I was thinking about selling out. He said the land doesn't belong to us. We just borrow it for a while, hold it in trust for whoever comes next. Our job isn't to profit from it or escape from it. Our job is to pass it on better than we found it, with its secrets and its scars intact." "And if there's nobody to pass it to?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "If my children want nothing to do with it, then you keep faith anyway, because that's what it means to be the guardian of a legacy. You don't get to choose when your watch ends, Marcus. You just get to choose how you stand it." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that made the world look washed clean. Marcus walked out to the north field, to the hole that had started all of this. He'd covered it with plywood and warning signs, but he could still see the edges where the earth had given way. He thought about filling it back in, sealing the chamber, and pretending he'd never found it. But that would be its own kind of betrayal, wouldn't it? The land had given up its secrets for a reason. Whether that reason was warning or opportunity, he couldn't say. But he knew he had a choice to make, and that choice would determine not just his own future, but the future of everything his family had built. In his pocket, his phone buzzed, a text from Claire. Just 3 words. "I'm sorry, Dad." Marcus stared at those words for a long time. An apology, but not a surrender. She was still hurt, still angry, still thought he was wrong, but she was reaching out, and that meant something. That meant maybe there was still hope. He typed back slowly, his old fingers clumsy on the screen. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Then he put his phone away and looked out across his fields, at the land that held so many secrets, at the legacy that had become both blessing and curse. The rain had left everything gleaming, the soil dark and rich, ready for planting, ready for another season, another year, another generation if he could find a way to bridge the gap between past and future. Marcus Henley squared his shoulders and walked back toward the farmhouse. He had work to do. He had records to protect, a family to rebuild, and a farm to keep alive for one more season, one more year, one more lifetime if he could manage it. The land remembered everything. Now it was his job to decide what that memory meant and what price he was willing to pay to honor it. 3 weeks passed before Claire came back to the farm. Marcus spent those weeks working the land with a kind of focused intensity that reminded him of the year Sarah died, when the only thing that kept him sane was the rhythm of seeds and soil, planting and harvest. He'd learned long ago that the land had a way of absorbing grief, of taking the poison out of pain if you worked it hard enough. Ruth helped him properly excavate the chamber, bringing in supports to make it safe, installing a proper ladder and lighting. They cataloged everything methodically, photographing each ledger page, each document, creating a digital archive that Marcus stored in 3 separate locations. Insurance, his great-grandfather had called it. Marcus thought of it more as a burden he was documenting for whoever came next. On a Thursday morning when the corn was just starting to show green shoots in neat rows across the south field, Claire's car came up the driveway. Marcus was on the porch, mending a bridle that was older than he was, and he watched her park and sit there for a full minute before getting out. She looked different somehow, not younger, but lighter, as if she'd set down something heavy. "The corn's coming in nice," she said as she climbed the porch steps. "Good soil. Your mother always said this land could grow anything if you treated it right." Marcus set aside the bridle. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus's grandfather had argued with his father all those years ago, where Sarah had planned her gardens, where Marcus had signed the deed after his father died. The wood was scarred from decades of use, marked by coffee rings and knife cuts and the slow accumulation of family history. "I talked to Nathan," Claire said after a long silence, "about what you said, about responsibility and legacy and all of it. And he reminded me of something I'd forgotten. When Mom was sick, right at the end, she told me that this land was the only thing that kept you from falling apart when your own father died. Said watching you work these fields was what made her fall in love with you in the first place." Claire's hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "She said you understood something most people didn't, that being connected to something older than yourself, something that would outlive you, that was what gave life meaning." Marcus felt his throat tighten. She had a way of seeing things clear. "I've been angry at you for so long, Dad. Angry that you chose this place over having a normal life, over moving somewhere with better hospitals when Mom got sick, over retiring and taking it easy like you deserved. But I was really angry at myself." Claire's voice cracked. "For wanting you to sell because it would be easier for me. Because I wouldn't have to worry about you out here alone, wouldn't have to feel guilty about not coming home more often." "Claire, you don't have to explain." "Yes, I do." She looked at him directly, and he saw Sarah in her eyes, the same fierce honesty. "I need you to know that I understand now, why you can't sell, why you won't sell. This isn't just land, Dad. It's proof that our family survived, that they made mistakes, yeah, but they kept going. They found a way to hold on when everything was trying to tear them apart." Marcus reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. Her fingers were soft, unmarked by work, nothing like his own calloused palms. Different lives, different choices, but the same blood, the same stubborn streak that had kept the Henleys on this land for 5 generations. "I found something else in the chamber," Marcus said quietly. "A letter from your great-great-grandmother, written to her husband in 1898, before the Prohibition, before everything got complicated. She was asking him to stop the whiskey operation, to go back to just farming, said she was afraid of what would happen if they kept going down that road." Did he listen? No. But he kept the letter, kept it with all the other documents, like he wanted to remember there'd been a choice, even if he didn't make the right one. Marcus stood and retrieved a folder from the counter, handed it to Claire. "I've been thinking about choices a lot these last few weeks, about what I'm going to do with all this information, all these secrets." Claire opened the folder and found copies of the ledgers, the photographs, the letter from Marcus's great-grandfather. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing." She looked up, surprised. "I'm going to seal the chamber back up," Marcus continued. "Not bury it, not destroy the evidence. But I'm not going to use it either, not going to threaten anyone, not going to expose anyone. The people who made those deals, they're dead. Their children and grandchildren, they didn't do anything wrong except be born into families with complicated histories, just like us. But that means you lose your leverage. If the county comes after the land, if they try eminent domain like Mr. Garrett said, then I'll fight them in court like any other farmer would, on the merits, not with blackmail." Marcus sat back down. "Your great-great-grandmother asked her husband to choose what kind of man he wanted to be. I'm making the same choice now. I'm going to be the kind of man who holds on to his land because it's worth holding on to, not because I'm threatening people." Claire was quiet for a long time, studying the documents. Then she closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "Mom would be proud of you." "I hope so. I'm doing this for her as much as anyone." Marcus paused. "But I'm also doing it for you and Nathan, because someday, when I'm gone, this will be yours, both of you, and I want you to inherit something clean, something you can be proud of." "Dad, Nathan lives in Seattle. I live 2 hours away. Neither of us are farmers. What are we supposed to do with 400 acres? It was the question Marcus had been avoiding, the one that kept him awake at night. "I don't know, maybe you sell it after I'm gone? Maybe you lease it out like Ruth suggested. Maybe one of you has a kid someday who falls in love with this place the way I did. But that's your choice to make, not mine. My job is just to keep it alive until it's your turn." They talked for hours after that, really talked in a way they hadn't since Sarah died. Claire told him about her job at the hospital, about the patients she couldn't save and the ones she could. Marcus told her about the chamber, about the careful way he and Ruth had preserved everything, about his plan to create a proper historical record for the county museum. Not the bootlegging details, not the names in the ledgers, but the story of a farming family that survived hard times through determination and compromise. As the sun started to set, Claire stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Can I bring the kids next weekend? They should see this place, should understand where they came from." Marcus felt something warm bloom in his chest, hope maybe, or just relief. "I'd like that very much." After she left, Marcus walked out to the north field. The hole was still there, covered with plywood and surrounded by stakes and caution tape. Tomorrow, he'd start the process of sealing it properly, building a concrete cap that would protect the chamber while preserving what was inside. A compromise between burial and exposure, between forgetting and exploiting. Ruth found him there as the last light faded from the sky. She'd been stopping by most evenings, ostensibly to check on the chamber work, but really just to make sure he was eating and hadn't worked himself into the ground. "Claire came by," Marcus said without preamble. "I saw her car. Things okay?" "Better. Not perfect, but better." He looked at the covered hole, at the field stretching away in the twilight. "She asked what would happen to this place after I'm gone." "What did you tell her?" "That it was her choice to make, her and Nathan's." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Ruth, can I ask you something? When your husband died, when you decided to keep farming instead of selling out, did you ever regret it?" Ruth was silent for so long Marcus thought she might not answer. Then she said, "Every damn day for the first year. It felt like I was trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands. But then one morning I woke up and realized I wasn't doing it alone anymore. The land was holding me too, supporting me the way I was supporting it. It's a partnership, Marcus. Always has been. I don't want Claire to feel obligated. Don't want her keeping this place out of guilt or duty. She won't. When the time comes, she'll do what's right. Might not be what you want, might not be what you'd choose, but it'll be right for her, and that's what matters." Ruth put her hand on his shoulder. "Your great-grandfather built something complicated here. Good intentions that went wrong, wrong choices made for right reasons. But in the end, he tried to give his children a choice. You're doing the same thing. That's the best any of us can do." The next day, Marcus called Nathan. His son answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. "Dad, everything okay?" "Yeah, fine. Just wanted to talk." Marcus sat on the porch, watching clouds build in the west. "Claire told you about the chamber, about what we found?" "She did." "That's pretty wild, Dad. Our great-great-grandfather was basically a mob boss. He was a farmer who made some bad choices in hard times, but he was also smart enough to leave those choices documented so future generations would understand what he'd done and why." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Claire said you're not going to use the information, that you're sealing everything back up." "That's right. Even though it means you could lose the farm?" "Even though." Marcus watched a hawk circle overhead, riding thermals invisible to human eyes. "Your mother and I, we didn't do right by you, son. We were so focused on keeping this place running that we didn't see what it was costing you. The early mornings, the canceled plans because harvest couldn't wait. The way every conversation somehow came back to weather and crops and work. We made you feel like the farm mattered more than you did." "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I need to say this." Marcus's voice was rough. "I don't blame you for leaving. I'm proud of you for building a life you chose instead of one we chose for you. But I need you to know that this land, it's not more important than you. It's not more important than Claire. It's just what I know how to do, how I know how to show love. By keeping something alive, by passing something on." Nathan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. "I hated this place for a long time. Hated the smell of it, the work, the way it consumed everything. But you know what? I named my company Henley Consulting, used our family name because even though I left, even though I built something completely different, I wanted that connection, wanted people to know where I came from. Your mother would have liked that. Yeah, she would have. Nathan cleared his throat. Listen, Dad, I've been thinking. I've got some money saved up. What if I invested in the farm? Not to take it over or anything, but to help modernize, make it more efficient so it's not so much work for one person. We could hire help, update equipment, maybe even transition to organic crops that fetch better prices. Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. Nathan, you don't have to do that. I know I don't. But maybe I want to. Maybe it's time I stop running from where I came from and figure out how to honor it in my own way. He paused. We don't all have to be farmers, Dad, but we can all help keep the farm alive, if you'll let us. After they hung up, Marcus sat on the porch for a long time, watching the storm clouds roll in. The rain came gently at first, then harder, soaking into the earth that had been waiting for it. The corn would love this, would shoot up green and strong. The soil would hold the moisture, would feed it back to the plants over the next weeks as they grew toward harvest. The land takes care of us if we take care of it. Sarah had said that 1,000 times, and Marcus had always thought he understood. But maybe he'd only understood part of it. The land took care of you by giving you purpose, by giving you something worth protecting. But it also took care of you by changing, by adapting, by accepting new ways of being tended and new people to do the tending. 2 months later, on a Saturday morning when the corn was waist-high and the soybeans were beginning to flower, Marcus stood in the north field with Claire, Nathan, and Claire's 2 kids. Ruth was there too, along with a few neighbors who'd gotten curious about the mysterious chamber. They'd come to witness the sealing, to see the Henley family put its secrets to rest properly. The chamber had been documented thoroughly. The County Historical Society had taken possession of selected items carefully chosen to tell the story of farming in the region without exposing anyone's family to scandal. The whiskey bottles, the photographs of the farm, the letters about agricultural practices, the ledgers with names and deals stayed in the chamber, preserved but sealed away. Marcus's grandson, 12-year-old Michael, peered down into the chamber one last time before they closed it for good. Grandpa, weren't you scared when you found all this? When you realized your family had secrets? Marcus thought about that. At first, yeah. But then I realized something. Every family has secrets, Michael. Every piece of land has a history. What matters isn't pretending the secrets don't exist. It's deciding what you're going to do about them. How you're going to let them shape the future. Are you going to tell everyone what you found? No. Some stories are important because they remind us where we came from. Others are important because they teach us what not to repeat. This story, it's the second kind. I know it now. You'll know it when you're older. And that's enough. Michael nodded seriously, then pointed to the bottle Marcus was holding. It was the first one he'd found, the one marked Henley Reserve, 1897. What are you going to do with that? Marcus looked at the bottle, at the amber liquid still clear after more than a century. I'm going to put it on the mantel in the farmhouse, not to celebrate what my great-grandfather did, but to remember that people are complicated. They make mistakes. They do wrong things for reasons they think are right. And sometimes they leave behind both the evidence of their sins and the possibility of redemption. They sealed the chamber with poured concrete, placed a marker stone on top that read Henley Family History, 1872, present. No dates about the bootlegging, no specifics that would invite questions, just a simple acknowledgement that this spot held memory, that the ground beneath had stories to tell. After everyone else left, Marcus stood in the field with Claire and Nathan. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red that made the corn look like it was burning. Your mother and I used to stand right here, Marcus said quietly. This exact spot. She'd make me stop working at sunset, said I needed to remember why I was doing all this. She'd point at the house, at the barn, at the fields, and she'd say, "This is what forever looks like, Marcus. This is what we're leaving behind." Do you miss her? Claire asked softly. Every single day. But she's here too somehow, in the land, in the choices I make, in the fact that you two came back. Marcus looked at his children, at the adults they'd become despite his failures and shortcomings. I know this place was hard on you growing up. Know it asked more of you than it gave back sometimes, but I hope you understand now what I was trying to protect, Not just dirt and crops, but the idea that some things are worth holding on to even when it's hard. Nathan put his arm around his father's shoulders. "We understand, Dad, and we're going to make sure it was worth it." They walked back to the farmhouse together as darkness fell. Inside, Ruth had started dinner, and the smell of cooking filled the house with warmth. Claire's kids were exploring the attic, finding old photographs and farm equipment that seemed impossibly ancient to them. Nathan was on his phone, already making plans for the farm improvements he wanted to fund. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the land his great-great-grandfather had broken in 1872, that his grandfather had saved during the Depression, that his father had modernized, that he had kept alive through his own hard years. 400 acres that held secrets and scars, that remembered everything, even when the people forgot. The land takes and the land gives. It takes work and worry, takes youth and strength, takes everything you have to offer. But it gives back too. Gives purpose and connection, gives meaning and memory, gives a legacy that outlasts any one person's mistakes or triumphs. Marcus Henley had spent his last dollars on a collapsing tractor, had broken through earth that held his family's secrets, and had discovered that the real fortune wasn't what his great-grandfather had hidden, but what he'd preserved. The possibility that each generation could choose differently, could honor the past while building something new. The bottle on the mantel caught the lamplight, amber liquid glowing like captured sunlight. Henley Reserve, 1897. A reminder of wrong choices and right intentions, of secrets kept and truths acknowledged, of a family that survived not by being perfect but by being stubborn enough to keep going when everything else fell apart. Outside, the corn rustled in the evening breeze, and the land that had seen wars and floods, boom times and dust bowls, bootlegging and honest sweat, settled into another night, waiting for tomorrow's sunrise, for another season, for whatever the Henleys would make of it next. 5 seasons passed. Marcus watched them roll through like waves across his fields, each one leaving its mark, each one teaching him something new about patience and surrender. The first winter after they sealed the chamber was brutal, temperatures dropping to levels the county hadn't seen in decades. But the farmhouse held, the new furnace Nathan had installed keeping the old walls warm. Spring came late but generous, soaking the earth until it turned black and rich. Summer blazed hot and dry, testing Marcus's irrigation systems and his faith. And fall was magnificent, the kind of harvest that reminded him why his great-great-grandfather had chosen this land in the first place. The farm changed in ways both visible and invisible. Nathan made good on his promise, investing in modern equipment that made the work less backbreaking. A new tractor replaced the one that had broken through the earth. Though Marcus kept the old one in the barn, its front wheels still bent from the drop, a reminder of how discovery sometimes comes through destruction. Claire organized the family archives, creating a proper historical record that would eventually go to the county museum, the story of 5 generations of Henleys who'd worked this soil. But the biggest change was in the people themselves. Marcus learned to ask for help, to accept that holding on to the land didn't mean holding on to it alone. Ruth became more than a neighbor, her farm and his operating in quiet partnership, sharing equipment and labor, and the unspoken understanding of those who'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. Claire came home twice a month, bringing the kids, letting them run wild in the fields while she helped Marcus with bookkeeping and planning. Nathan called every Sunday, his questions about yields and markets growing more sophisticated as he learned the language of the land he'd once fled. On a morning in late October, 6 years after the tractor had fallen through the earth, Marcus stood in his kitchen and watched his grandson Michael, now 18, walk toward the barn. The boy had spent the summer on the farm, had learned to drive the tractor, to read the sky for weather, to feel the readiness of crops just by running his hand along the stalks. Now he was heading back to college, but something had shifted in him during those months. He moved differently across the land, with purpose and belonging. Claire joined Marcus at the window, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. "He's coming back after graduation," she said quietly. "Asked me last night if I thought you'd let him work the farm for a year before he decides what to do with his life." Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. "What'd you tell him?" That it was his choice to make, that the land didn't demand anything from him except honesty. She handed him the coffee. "Same thing you told me and Nathan. Turns out, when you give people the freedom to leave, sometimes they choose to stay." They watched Michael disappear into the barn. Emerging moments later with the ancient bridle Marcus had been mending that day, Claire first came back. The boy had asked to keep it, said he wanted something that connected him to all the Henleys who'd worked this ground before him. "Your mother would have loved this," Marcus said, his voice rough. "Seeing him connect to this place the way he has." "She knew," Claire replied. "Even at the end when she was so sick, she told me that the land had a way of calling people home when they were ready to hear it. Said you couldn't force it, could only keep the door open." She paused. "I didn't understand then. Thought she was just being sentimental because she was dying. But she was right. The land called Michael. It called Nathan back in his own way. It even called me back, though I fought it for years." Marcus thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made to her, about all the times he'd questioned whether keeping that promise was stubbornness or wisdom. "I sealed that chamber thinking I was closing a chapter," he said, "putting the past to rest so we could move forward. But that's not how it works, is it? The past doesn't rest. It lives in everything we do, every choice we make. The difference is now we know the whole story, the good and the bad, and we get to decide what it means." Claire set down her mug. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Nathan and I have been talking. When the time comes, when you're ready to step back, we want to create a trust. Keep the farm in the family, but open it up for education programs. Let schools bring kids out here to learn about agriculture and history. The real history, including the complicated parts." Marcus turned to look at his daughter. "You mean tell people about the bootlegging? About what your great-great-grandfather did?" "Not sensationalize it, but not hide it either. Use it as a teaching tool about choices and consequences, about how families survive hard times by adapting. The Historical Society loves the idea, says it would make this place a living classroom." She met his eyes. "We'd still farm it, still work the land, but we'd also share it, let it serve a bigger purpose than just feeding one family." It was so perfectly right that Marcus wondered why he hadn't thought of it himself. The land had always been about more than profit or pride. It had been about connection, about understanding where you came from so you could figure out where you were going. Opening it up to others, letting them learn from the Henley family's mistakes and triumphs that felt like the right next chapter. "Your mother would have loved that even more," he said, and this time he was smiling. The following spring, Marcus turned 77. His joints complained more now, his back required careful attention, and he'd finally accepted that he couldn't work dawn to dusk the way he once had. But he still rose with the sun, still walked his fields every morning, still felt the soil between his fingers to test its readiness for planting. Michael had graduated and come back, just as Claire predicted. He'd taken over the day-to-day operations with an enthusiasm that reminded Marcus of himself 50 years ago. But the boy was smarter, more willing to learn from others, less convinced that hard work alone could solve every problem. He'd implemented crop rotation strategies Marcus had resisted for years, had brought in native prairie grass strips that attracted pollinators and reduced erosion. The farm was producing more with less effort, and Marcus had to admit it stung a little to see how much easier it could have been if he'd been less stubborn earlier. But that was the thing about legacy, wasn't it? Each generation had to make its own mistakes, learn its own lessons. Marcus's job now wasn't to teach Michael everything he knew, but to give the boy space to discover what Marcus couldn't. On the anniversary of finding the chamber, Marcus walked out to the north field alone. The marker stone stood where they'd sealed it, weathered now by 7 winters, softened by moss and lichen. Someone, probably Michael, had planted wildflowers around it, and they bloomed in a riot of color that transformed the spot from a grave into a garden. Marcus sat down on the stone, feeling the sun warm on his face. "Well, old man," he said aloud, addressing the great-grandfather he'd never known, "I think I finally understand what you were trying to do. You weren't just hiding evidence or creating leverage. You were leaving a choice for whoever came next, a test maybe to see what kind of people we'd become." The wind moved through the corn, creating waves of sound that could have been voices if you listened right. Marcus closed his eyes and let himself imagine all the Henleys who'd stood in this field before him. His great-great-grandfather, stern and complicated, making choices he thought would save his family. His great-grandmother, writing letters asking her husband to choose differently. His grandfather, keeping secrets and passing down cryptic warnings. His father, working the land honestly, trying to wash away the stains of the past through sheer labor and integrity. His mother, who he barely remembered, but who Ruth said had the kindest hands she'd ever seen. And Sarah, always Sarah, who'd understood that the land wasn't something you conquered but something you partnered with. "I hope I did right by you," Marcus said quietly. "Hope I honored what you built without being destroyed by it. Hope I passed on something worth keeping." A truck engine broke his reverie. Ruth's old pickup came bouncing across the field, and she parked beside the marker. She climbed out with 2 thermoses and a knowing smile. "Figured I'd find you here," she said, sitting down beside him. "You always come out here when you're thinking too hard." "Just talking to ghosts." "They talk back?" "Sometimes. In their own way." Marcus accepted the thermos she offered, recognized the smell of the coffee Sarah used to make, the recipe Ruth had learned and kept alive all these years. "Michael's doing good work, better than I did at his age." "Different work," Ruth corrected. "Not better or worse, just different. The land needed what you gave it then, needs what he's giving it now." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the wind patterns move across the growing corn. This far from the road, you couldn't hear traffic or see houses. It could have been 1872 or 1920 or any year in between. The land looked the same, felt the same, held the same promise it had always held. "You know what I realized?" Marcus said eventually. "That chamber, those secrets, they weren't the fortune. The real fortune was having time to figure out what to do with them, having Claire and Nathan come back, having Michael choose this life, having you as a friend all these years." He looked at Ruth. "The money in those bottles, the leverage in those ledgers, none of that mattered as much as having people who cared enough to help me decide what mattered." Ruth's eyes were bright with emotion. "You always were slow on the uptake, Marcus Henley. Took you 7 years to figure out what the rest of us knew from the start." "What's that?" "That you were never alone in this. That the land holds all of us, all our stories, all our mistakes and triumphs. Your great-grandfather learned that too late. You learned it just in time." That evening, the whole family gathered at the farmhouse for dinner. Claire and her husband, Nathan and his wife Michael and his younger sister Emma. Ruth was there too, and a few neighbors who'd become family over the years. They ate around the long table, plates passing, conversation flowing, the house filled with the kind of noise Marcus had stopped hoping for after Sarah died. After dinner, Michael stood up, nervous in the way young men get when they're about to say something important. "Grandpa, I wanted to tell you something. Tell everyone, actually." He glanced at Emma, who nodded encouragement. "I've been accepted to the Agricultural College's graduate program. They want me to study sustainable farming practices and then come back here to implement them. Turn this place into a model for other family farms." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "That's wonderful, son. There's more. They want to use the farm's history as part of the research. The bootlegging era, how the family survived the Depression, how you've kept this place going when everyone else sold out. They think there are lessons in that, patterns that could help other families hold on to their land." Emma spoke up then. "And I'm doing my senior thesis on it. The professor said I could use our family archives, the documents Claire organized. Said understanding agricultural history is key to building sustainable food systems for the future." Marcus looked around the table at all these faces, these people who carried Henley blood and Henley stubbornness, who'd chosen to stay connected to this land in their own ways. This was what legacy looked like, not perfect, not simple, but alive and continuing. Nathan raised his glass. "To Dad. For being stubborn enough to hold on when everyone told him to let go, and wise enough to let us choose what holding on means for our generation." They drank, and Marcus tasted salt in his coffee, realized he was crying, and didn't care who saw. These were good tears, earned tears, the kind that came from seeing something you'd built with your own hands continue after you. The years continued their role, as years do. Marcus celebrated his 80th birthday working in the garden, his hands still steady enough to transplant seedlings, even if his knees complained about kneeling. The farm trust was established, and the first school groups came that fall, wide-eyed children from the city touching soil for the first time, learning that food didn't just appear in grocery stores, but was coaxed from earth through patience and understanding. Michael married a woman who'd grown up on a farm 3 counties over, someone who understood the life without needing explanation. They talked about building a house on the eastern ridge, near the old family cemetery where Marcus's great-great-grandfather and all the Henleys who'd come after were buried. Another generation, another chapter. On a cool morning in late November, Marcus walked out to the north field one last time. His steps were slower now, his breathing harder, but the land still called him, still asked him to witness one more sunrise, one more season's turn. The marker stone was covered with frost that glittered like diamonds in the early light. He thought about the chamber beneath his feet, about the secrets it held, about the choice his great-grandfather had left him. He'd chosen to seal it, to preserve the truth without weaponizing it, to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. It had been the right choice. He knew that now. The land had rewarded it with abundance, with family, with meaning. Marcus Henley stood in the field his great-great-grandfather had broken, where his grandfather had survived the Dust Bowl, where his father had modernized and persevered, where he himself had discovered that fortune came in forms you couldn't stack in a barn. The sun rose over land that would see another planting, another harvest, another generation of Henleys learning what it meant to be keepers rather than owners, partners rather than masters. The land remembered everything, the secrets and the sorrows, the triumphs and the failures, the people who'd loved it, and the price they'd paid for that love. But it also forgave, accepted, continued. That was the miracle Marcus had finally learned to see. The land endured, not despite its scars, but because of them. Each mark a story, each story a reason to keep going. He turned and walked back toward the farmhouse where smoke was rising from the chimney, where Michael was probably already making coffee, where life continued in the eternal rhythm of seasons and generations. Behind him, the sun climbed higher, warming the earth that held so many secrets, blessing the ground that would feed another year, another family, another chapter in a story that had no end. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.